Hello and welcome. Today we'll talk about how to go from Blender through Substance Painter and finally reaching Godot in a single workflow using very simple shapes, very simple processes, just so that we can understand how to get from the beginning to the end. So in this video, we'll start off checking out what the different material properties are. We'll go through each one of them and we'll just mess around a little bit. If you already know what emission is and roughness and metallic, you can jump to the next chapter. And in the second part of the video, we'll understand a little bit of how the interface of Blender works and what we need to click to make a mesh from Blender become a file so that we can read in Substance Painter. Finally, we'll also go through Substance Painter and identify what we need to click to eventually draw and use Substance Painter more around what the object is. So once again, Blender, Substance Painter, and Godot. I don't know how to use properly Blender. I merely know enough to do the things that I'm going to show here and these examples that you're seeing in the screen now. I barely know anything about Substance Painter as well, just barely enough to randomly put things on the screen to make this troll or orc that you can see here in the screen too. And finally, Godot, I know significantly more, but I'm yet to actually have a game made on it. So, well, if you know much of the three, at least you'll know how to jump from one to the other. If you know how to do this, feel free to use this video as a comedic relief to see me struggling through them. If you have no idea how they work, then hopefully this video is also for you. My main goal here is to make something simple from beginning to end so that even newcomers to game development, such as myself, and with barely to no artistic skills whatsoever, such as myself, can actually use these programs to have something pretty interesting at the end. So let's get to it. Any model needs a mesh, which is basically the points that make the model. For example, in Godot, you can add a mesh as a mesh instance. And the mesh instance, which is a node, has a mesh property. You can create your own mesh or use a pre-existing one. Just an example, a cube mesh looks like this. It's a cube. And within the mesh, you can understand that the mesh has vertices, which are points around the object or the model. In the case that the cube has 8, 4 on top, 4 below. Every mesh will also have a material, which by default is like this very boring material. You can click here in material, add a new spatial material, shade is more advanced. Click here once again, and you'll have a bunch of options to choose from. The most important parameters that I'll talk about will be the albedo, which is basically the color of the mesh or color of the model. Metallic, which says whether the model or parts of it is metallic, which basically means it reflects light. Roughness, which is like how rough the surface is. Very rough means it's hard to get reflections also. It's similar to metallic. I'll exemplify shortly. Emission, which is, say you have a neon sign, for example. You can basically have light coming from your model using emission. Normal map will show or tell Godot how the vertices should be understood as its projection direction. Basically speaking, this face here of the cube has a normal going upwards. Basically meaning, oh, this is a face with 4 points, and Godot should understand it as being a face looking upwards. But you could modify this normal so that the edges won't actually point upwards, will point to the side, and the cube would look smoother. We'll see this eventually. The next one will be ambient occlusion, which is a way to tell Godot how to properly shade your model. This will be important on more advanced use cases. And depth, which is a method of telling also Godot without changing the model itself that there are 3D elements which should have depth within them. For example, I could create a hole here without modifying the model. If I want a very shallow hole, I can just have a texture, which is an image, telling Godot that this area should have a little black hole maybe. So black will be a albedo. Maybe it's a metallic also because it's made of iron, I don't know. So you change the metallic and roughness to something you can look up in the internet, good values for iron. And nothing animation, you can change the normal and depth to say it's a hole and it should be rounded, something like that, without actually changing the points of the model, which are 1, 2, 3, 4 in the top. With this in mind, let's just mess with these values and then we'll go actually to do something more advanced. So albedo, once again, you change the color. I'll say this is like a Minecraft style grass block, I don't know. Green wool. Next, metallic, let's say it's actually a wool made of like strong metal. You can see that I barely can see anything, but we'll fix this very soon. And say the roughness is 0. You can see how much it changed. Roughness 0 and metallic 1 basically means it's a mirror. So it's a green mirror now. I'll just make it half to say it's kind of reflective or not. I can change the emission to say, oh, it should also glow on yellow or something like that. Sure. So it's glowing in yellow. I'll just make it very light. To make a normal, I'll need a proper texture, so I won't use this for now. Same for occlusion and same for depth. So these things you can just ignore for now. But this is pretty boring. How to make it more interesting in Godot? Since I have the model here with this material, I will save the material just to make sure I don't lose it. So interest cube dot material. I'm using dot material just because it's more widespread. For example, Blender uses also material, so it's easier to understand across softwares if you use material. And it's also smaller, I believe. So let's make this world a little bit more interesting. I'll add a light, directional light, to be like a sun. And I'll just point downwards, something like that. I'll add another mesh to be like a ground. So I'll just move this cube upwards, call it cube. Click in the second mesh, click here. I'll add a quad mesh, just a simple one. You can click here to edit the preferences or like what the quad mesh is about. You can see it's pretty weird. I want to rotate it in the y-axis. So to rotate, you come to transform. Okay, I want to rotate in x minus 90. There we go. Next, what we'll configure is a world environment, which basically tells Godot how to render the scene. So if I add a world environment node, I can click here and add a new environment. You'll see much changes because now we're editing all the environment manually, which is different from the default one. Just click here, you can edit all these informations however you like. In my case, I'll create a sky, procedural sky with no ambient light. The sky contribution, I'll lower it a bit, 0.8. I will change this tone map, which is one of the most important things to change to make the scene more beautiful, to filmic. You can also choose this one, it's also good. Okay, I don't want reflection, I want SSAO. I want glow because I added emission map. And you can already see this cube is fairly interesting already. It's like very reflective. So the main reason I'm making this video is to explain to you that within a material, what we'll edit in future videos are these values: albedo, metallic, roughness, emission, normal map, ambient occlusion, and depth. There are other ones, but I'll stick to those specifically because of the workflow that I'm going to talk about. Now let's try out Blender. So Blender is a very complex and feature-rich program for modeling and for many other things for that matter. But in our case, we'll just stick to the basics. You'll click in general. If it's the first time you're using Blender, you also choose how your spacebar will work. I'm using Blender 2.9.2, I think. I forget now. Blender is so complex that I have no idea how to use it actually. So if you are an experienced Blender user, see this video as a comedic relief kind of thing. If you have no idea how Blender works, welcome to the club. I'm pretty much there too. But I want to show you the little that I know so that you as an indie game developer or just someone trying out things as I am now, I don't even have a game in the works yet, but I still want to help you try to understand how modeling and using 3D in Godot. So first thing, since we are just using the modeling part of Blender to send things to Godot, I'll just get rid of this and this, which is the camera and light. And now that you have only your cube, what we're going to do is go through the entire workflow of modeling, painting, generating the textures, and importing it to Godot. And it will be a very simple thing to do. Let's say this is the model. We'll actually edit the model in a future step when we'll do something more complex. But let's say all we have is this model. Okay, what you'll do is File, Export, FBX, and I already exported it just now, but you just export it, don't change anything, export. Great. Now you go to Substance Painter. Once again, I'm terrible in drawing in general. Even though I want to share the little that I know to be able to do something simple, yet interesting to look at and also interesting to use in games. So if you're an expert painter, even within Blender, good job. I don't know how to use Blender for that yet. Maybe in the future. But from what I understand, Substance Painter is much faster to use to do simple things, mainly because of the auto-generated things that are below. The reason we'll use Substance Painter in this set of tutorials is because Painter has a lot of predefined and pre-generated brushes, as you can see here in brushes, grudges, which is like dirt and random particles that you can use, skins and hard surfaces normals, materials, and so on and so forth, that Blender doesn't have. Blender has some. You can also find them in the internet, but I am here to try to make it as fast as possible to go from an idea and some like simple modeling things to a proper model in Godot to be used. If you are a student, you have access to a free version of Substance Painter that you should definitely use and try it out. Once again, I don't know how to paint properly, I don't know how to model properly, I don't understand the two programs very well, both Painter and also Blender. But with this little workflow and the way to export things from one program to the other, I hope to make life simple to prototype and build things fast for example, game jams. Okay, so what I'll do is just click New. I'll choose this one, PBR Metallic Roughness Alpha Test Algorithmic. I'll select that file. So it's the FBX file. I'll make sure to change the normal map to OpenGL, and resolution you can choose either 1K, 2K, or 4K. I'll say 2K for now. And you click OK. If you've never used Substance Painter before, to the left, you'll see the model. To the right, you'll see the texture. You can just, its name is Substance Painter because you paint a substance over a model, as you would expect. So if you center mouse button drag, it'll drag things. If you control middle mouse button or control, I always forget things. If you alt middle mouse button, you can rotate things. You can also use these buttons here or F1, 2, 3, 4 to jump between different views. I'll stick to F2, which is perspective view. And here's the cube once again. And something else that you need to do is to come here into texture set settings, come down and click in this big mesh maps. You can feel free to check the options. You don't need to change anything other than the texture size, which, well, you can basically, this texture size is how much detail the pictures you are drawing will have during your draw in Substance Painter. Later, when you actually export these images to Godot, there will be another option. So feel free to change if you wish. It won't have much of an impact. Everything else is fine. So you can click and wait for all the meshes to be generated. Click OK. And now let's paint. To the right, I can see the layers. And this is very similar to Krita, Photoshop, Paint.net, and other layering programs where you can add a layer. Say I want a fill layer like this one. Added a fill layer. I can change information within this layer and will apply to everything because it's a fill layer in this case. I can also paint in a paint layer. I can have folder of layers within layers and use the auto-generated or preset generated layers and textures to draw on top of a mesh. So in my case, I'll try to mimic that first cube that we did in Godot. All I will need is a fill layer where I'll edit the color, the height. I won't actually change anything, so I can click to deselect. Roughness, metallic, the normal, which I don't actually intend to change. Opacity, I don't intend to change. And emission, I'll change that too. So let's say my base color will be that green, dark green. My roughness is about here. My metallic is way up here. And I have an emission of yellow color, I think it was. Okay. There we go. So this should be more or less what I saw back in Godot on my other cube. If you also, what is it? Control, no. Here, Shift right mouse button drag, you can change the position of where the sun is. So I keep forgetting every time. Well, maybe it's more green. I don't quite remember anymore. But let's say it's like this. I'll just Control S, save it. I'll save in the same place so that everything is together. Just say cube. And let's export. File, export, textures. We already have the mesh, which is the FBX file. Now we need the textures. I'll just go back to the same place where everything else is. And here I'll need to change some things. First, I'll go to output templates. This is what we'll see. I have created a Godot version, but what you'll do is click on metallic roughness, this one here, PBR metallic roughness, and you can just right click it and duplicate. So you'll create a new one, just double click and name it Godot so that you have it within your system. I'll call it Godot 2 because I already have one. And what you'll need to change is first, the normal is not DirectX. Godot uses OpenGL, RGB channels. Here you go. And you need to add the ambient occlusion with a gray mask. So you click here, gray. You can just Control C, Control V here and call it ambient occlusion maybe. Feel free to choose your name. And you drag and drop this mixed AO, gray channel. I'm not sure the difference between this one, and this one. Really don't. I tried all three and all of them worked. So, and the other thing that will also extract from Substance Painter is the height, which is already here. But this height needs to be of type EXR of 32F bits. So use this one if you intend to use height on Godot. The height here is the same as the depth over there. Wonderful. Okay, so with this, so just save it. I'll even come here to settings. I'll click here in the file type based on output template. So follow these types with these values over here too. With proper place, I'll first save settings just to make sure I don't lose anything after the fact. Export textures. Now I should have the Godot template here. I'll just use my old one, but the new one should be the same thing. Export. Now we'll have these 7 textures to use in Godot. Close. Let's go back to Godot now. So Godot, here is our previous cube. Here we have the cube FUS. These things are tests, so it doesn't matter. Remove so that we don't confuse. And we can double click it. New inherited. And here we have the cube. Oh, it's very interesting, right? We also have this default material that comes from Blender. We could use it, maybe, but just letting you know that by default, if you click in cube, click in mesh, and come here in surface 1, this material is the same as this material, which came from Blender. So if I click here or double click the material or create a new one if you prefer, that's fine too. We can go and fill in all the 7 textures that we get from Substance Painter. First, base color is this albedo. And if you are using the same material coming from Blender, just remember to remove the base color because this comes from the color of Blender, which is not white. Emissive, just put here in emission. You won't always have emissive textures when you export from Substance Painter. It depends on what you have set up within it. Height will go into depth. So here's the texture. Oops, height over here. And I found that in this case, I don't have anything in the height, but we'll test things out very soon. But the best variables to be used here is scale 001 and with deep parallax on. Nice. Okay, so now metallic. We'll put this here. We'll put normal into normal. Where's normal? Here. Need to turn it on. And roughness into roughness here. And something that I forgot to say in the video is that since we didn't change anything in the ambient occlusion map or texture within Substance Painter, there's no ambient occlusion texture being exported from it. That's why it's only 7. And here you go. Now we have this supposedly the same cube as we had before. Let's see if it's the same or at least near enough. So we can get the cube scene that I just created, oops, and drag it to our same environment. Let's see how different they are. I forget why the snapping is on, but either way, you'll see that the two are fairly similar, right? Maybe this color is a little bit different. So I'll just save this as, I don't know, test, just so I don't lose it in the future. And now I can just go back to Surface Painter and say I want actually this color here, and emissive should be less yellow. So Control S to save. Export textures, export. And Godot will get textures and update the model. Now it's a little bit different. So if you want to try things out now before the next video, I suggest you to go back to Surface Painter and use also this layer here. So you just click a new paint layer. You can draw things on top And you can also specify how you are drawing. If you come here in material, you can just change the color to be, let's say, a red. Now you want to do, say, something to tell Godot that it needs to go down into the cube, and something that is very rough and not metallic at all. I don't know, something like that. And let's say there's something on top. Maybe you're very artistic. You can try to draw, say, something on top in specific, like someone. So if you go back to export, which is Ctrl-Shift-E, export. Let's close this now and wait for Godot to import the assets once again. And here you have your cube with the information of something going into the cube, which is, if you look like this, you can't actually see it because it is a texture. It's not a 3D information. But if you look from the top, it definitely looks like there's a depression. And something else that we can also do before we finish this video is, let's just take this out and let's pretend we are actually trying to draw a dice. So it'll be white, not white, totally white, something like this. I don't actually want emissive. It is pretty rough, it's not very metallic. Something like this, looks fine. And we can just come here into brushes, click on whatever you like. It just clicked on a random one. And let's do a draw layer similar to the one we just did before. Let's try drawing the numbers around. So first come here. I want something very black, which will go into the dice. It will be much less rough and more metallic, so that it's basically reflecting from within. It looks like a dark ink. And I'll also change this flow just so that it's not too strong. Notice that you have options here, and if you right click, you have the same options, like it's everywhere. Feel free to change things and make this dice your own. So let's say it'll be a 1 here. I'll just make like this. Okay, I think I need a larger flow. I don't actually remember where the 2 should be, so I'll just draw anywhere. Say 2 here, 3 here. Just drawing something fast so that we can finish. 4. This 4 is horrendous, but that's fine. Let's say this is 5. And wow, what a terrible 3. Whatever. And a 6. Oh boy, I don't know how to draw, and I'm trying to do it fast. So it's bad with worse, but okay. Come to export, I'll export. Going back to Godot. And here it is. And notice that this time, because of how we painted things, we have the AO. So we'll need to set this one up too. Go into material. Is it this one? I forget now. I'll just click in cube 2. Go into the instance. Go into the mesh. Go into the material. Yeah, it's just not updated here. And I'll include the ambient occlusion map, which this time generated. And yeah, save. Back to test. Here we have a little horrendous dice, but yeah. Thank you for watching everything so far. Next video, we'll tackle how to actually model something more complex than just a cube. We'll probably make a crate or a barrel of some kind, make something interesting at the end, and make something interesting with Substance Painter, putting some dirt and proper textures around the crate or barrel. As you can see, this is an example of something we may do in the next video. And finally, in the final video, we'll try to do something more complex, such as a character, as you can see as this or control. Hopefully all of them will be as simple as this one. Will take a little bit more time in the video, but if you got this far, you'll certainly be able to do the next two. See you next time.